Greetings, this is the Grumpy Old Slan, and today we'll be looking at second level magic user spells in Unearthed Arcana. So as we can see, there are 36 second level spells listed, of which 12 are new. So the first spell is Bind. It's got a duration of 1 round per level and a casting time of 2 segments, and the area of effect is special. When the spell is employed, the magic user causes any rope-like object of non-living material to behave as he or she orders. The subject can be string, yard, cord, line, rope, or even a cable. About 50 feet of normal rope, 1 inch diameter, plus 5 feet per level of the caster can be affected. Reduce length proportionally when the diameter increases, and increase length by 50% when diameter is halved. The commands possible to give under a bind spell are coil, form a neat coiled stack, coil and knot, loop, loop and knot, tie and knot, and the reverses of all of the above. Uncoil, etc. The rope or other rope-like object must be within about 1 foot of any object in order for it to respond properly, so it must usually be thrown or hurled nearby. Any creature affected by the rope-like object can, of course, interact with it as if it were a normal object. The creature's hold overrides the dwemer on the rope, and the rope takes 2 points of slashing damage before breaking. The rope cannot be used as a garrote, but can be used as a trip line or to entangle, as the druid spell, a single opponent. The dwemer does not cause the rope to have magical properties beyond its ability to obey commands, cf. Rope of climbing, rope of entanglement. I think this is a very polyvalent spell. It's got lots of possibilities. It mentions entangling an opponent or tripping them, but it can also be used to help overcoming an obstacle. If you hold one end of the rope and toss the other end, you can maybe get the rope to coil and knot on the other side of a chasm, maybe. What the spell does not mention is what happens with the rope at the end of the duration. I think most people would assume the rope will just stay where it is. If it's tied in a knot, the knot will stay, will not undo itself, so it would still be safe to use the rope even after the spell has expired. I don't like the 2 points of damage to slash the rope. If you have a 1 inch diameter rope, that may seem reasonable, but then if the rope is much thinner, then I would assume it is easier to slash, and I would even rule that with a thin enough line that you don't need to roll for any kind of success. Success would be automatic, assuming you have a sharp blade. The following spell is Deep Pockets, which is a range of touch, a duration of 24 turns plus 6 turns per level. It will affect 1 garment, and the casting time is 1 turn. This spell allows the magic user to specially prepare a garment so as to hold far more than it normally could. A finely sewn gown or robe of high quality material, at least 300 gold piece value, is fashioned so as to contain numerous hand-sized pockets. 1 dozen is the minimum number. The Deep Pockets spell then makes one of these pockets able to hold 1,000 gold pieces worth of weight, 5 cubic feet of volume, as if it were only 100 gold pieces of weight. Furthermore, there will be no discernible bulge where the special pocket is. The spell can be changed to allow 10 pockets each of 100 gold piece weight capability, half a cubic foot volume each. If a robe or like garment is sewn with 100 or more pockets, 1,000 gold piece minimum cost, then 100 pockets can be dwemered to contain 10 gold piece weight each and hold half a cubic foot of volume each. If the spell duration expires while there is material within the enchanted pockets, or a dispel magic is cast upon the enchanted garment, the wearer must make a saving throw versus spell. Failure indicates the material in those pockets has gone from extra-dimensional space to astral space, lost forever. Success indicates the material suddenly and totally appears around the wearer and immediately falls to the ground. In addition to the garment, the material components of this spell are a tiny needle and a strip of fine cloth given a half twist, fastened at the ends. Quite the useful spell. The initial duration when you have access to this spell is 7 hours, which is most of a day, and would allow whoever is using the garment to smuggle something as long as they know that they can get rid of whatever they're smuggling before the time is up. I quite like the spell, and I do like the image of all the material just popping into the air around the magic user and then just clattering all over the ground. This would certainly not be discreet and would certainly attract the attention of anyone in the vicinity who doesn't expect this to happen. The next spell is Flaming Sphere. It has a duration of 1 round per level. The area of effect is a 6-foot diameter sphere, and the casting time is 2 segments. A Flaming Sphere spell causes a burning globe of normal type fire to come into being up to 1 inch distant from the spellcaster. This sphere will then begin rolling in the direction in which the magic user points, even though it might be uphill. It will roll over low barriers such as walls, furnitures, etc., as long as these barriers are not over 4 feet tall. Flammable substances will be set afire by contact with the sphere. Creatures stuck will suffer 2 to 8 points of damage. All creatures within a 5-foot radius of the sphere's center must save versus spell or else take the indicated damage. A successful save negates the flaming sphere. The flaming sphere moves at a rate of 1 inch per round as long as the spellcaster points in the direction it is to move, for it otherwise merely stays at rest and flames. It can be extinguished by the same means as any normal fires of this size. The material components are a bit of tallow, a pinch of sulfur, and a dusting of powdered iron. I've had this spell being used in a game I ran, and the player was quite creative with its use of the sphere. It can be quite a destructive spell. You can always just have the sphere be static against a door that just can't be opened for whatever reason. As long as it's a wooden door, it can eventually burn through it, or at least weaken it enough that getting through is trivial. It can also be used as a barrier in combat. The sphere is 6 feet in diameter, but if you're within a 5-foot radius of the center, that means a 10-foot wide hallway can be effectively blocked by the sphere. Essentially, anyone wanting to go by it will have to take the risk of suffering burning damage. Of course, they could try to extinguish it, but it's a rather big fire and would require more than a simple water skin to extinguish. I like this spell. It's followed by Irritation, which has a range of 1 inch per level, will affect 1 creature, and it has a casting time of 2 segments. An irritation spell affects the epidermis of the subject creature. Creatures having very thick or insensitive skins, such as buffalo, elephants, scaled creatures, etc., are basically unaffected by the Dwemer. There are 2 versions of the spell, either of which can be cast from the standard preparation. Itching. When cast, this causes the subject to feel an instant itching sensation on some portion of its body. If 5 to 8 segments are not immediately spent scratching this irritated area, the subject creature will be so affected that the next 3 rounds will be spent squirming and twisting, effectively lowering the subject's armor class by 4 and its 2-hit probability by 2 during this time. Spells are ruined for the initial round the spell is in effect, but not for the following 3 rounds. Rash. When a rash version of the spell is cast, the subject creature will notice nothing for 1 to 4 rounds, but thereafter its entire skin will begin to break out in red welts which faintly itch. The rash will persist until either a cure disease or dispel magic is cast upon it. It lowers comeliness by 1 point per day until 4 days have passed, i.e., the maximum loss of comeliness is 4 points. After 1 week, the subject's dexterity is lowered by 1 point also. Symptoms vanish immediately upon the removal of the rash. All statistics return to normal. The material component for this spell is powdered leaf from poison ivy, oak, or sumac. Another interesting and potentially very fun spell. I feel the itching option to be a lot less powerful in general than the rash. Of course, you don't use either in the same setting. I could see how itching could be useful in combat, that is for sure. Though it seems a 2nd level spell slot could be used with much better spells, some of which we have seen, some of which we may see, and others which were in the original player's handbook. The Rash, if the magic user is powerful enough, he could cause people who are behind a siege wall to become victim of the spell, thus causing a panic in the castle or fortress as people think that there is a sickness, and several judicious applications of the spell would cause people to believe that this disease is spreading, shortening the duration of the siege as people either try to escape or willingly surrender the entire fortress to the besiegers. Similarly, if you're in a fortress, you cast this on the army besieging you, you could cause them to believe there is a disease. The fact that the people affected by it will also lose dexterity is a little bonus here. The loss of comeliness would presumably also affect charisma somewhat, so if it could be cast on commanding officers or leaders, it could have quite the impact. Next is No Alignment, which has a range of 1 inch, a duration of 1 round per level. The area of effect will be 1 creature per 2 rounds. The casting time is 1 round. Except as noted above, this spell is the same as the 2nd level clerical spell of the same name. If a target creature is scryed for only 1 round, only its alignment ethic, law, or chaos will be discerned. A useful spell. I've already discussed what I feel about it when we're going over the cleric spells, so I'm not going to repeat myself here, but I will put a link to that video. Next is Melf's Acid Arrow. The casting time is 4 segments, and the area of effect is 1 target, and it does have a special duration. By means of this spell, the magic user creates a magic arrow which speeds itself to its target as if fired from the bow of a fighter of the same level as the magic user casting the spell. The arrow is equal to a +1 weapon for hit determination purposes. The effect of a hit might inflict damage on the target even if it would not normally be harmed by an arrow or magic weapon of only +1 value. This is due to the acid. The arrow itself does 2 to 5 points of damage. The acid, which gushes forth when it hits, is equal to an acid missile of 8 ounce volume, 1 foot diameter area of effect, 2 to 8 hit points of damage, plus item saving throws. Splash does not apply. The acid strength increases by 1 round's worth of damage for every 3 levels of experience of the caster above the 3rd, so that damage will occur over 2 rounds if the spell cast is from a 4th to 6th level magic user, unless the target can have the acid neutralized. The material component of the spell are dart and powdered rhubarb leaf and adder stomach. A useful spell, allowing the magic user to potentially do quite a bit of damage to an opposing creature. The spell takes quite a bit of time to cast. I'm not sure I understand why. Most spells take 1 segment per level. The exception in general are either spells that have an extremely long duration or that are of a more informational nature and wouldn't be used in combat. With the spell, the magic user does take 2 chances that it will fail. One is if he or she gets hit during combat while attempting to cast the spell, and this is where it being 4 segments long is significant. And the other one is if the to-hit roll fails, and only a +1 to the roll is not a huge bonus, so it's far from guaranteeing a hit. Some DMs may decide that a failed to-hit roll that would, however, be high enough to hit an unarmored opponent might be ruled as damaging the armor of the target, but not causing damage to the target, him or herself. So that's one possibility to maybe give that spell a little bit more oomph without actually affecting combat in a major way. Next is Preserve. Its duration is permanent. The casting time is 2 rounds, and the area of effect is half a cubic foot per level of caster. A Preserve spell enables the caster to retain some item fresh and whole until some later time when it is needed in a spell. Of course, the Dwemer is ineffective in retaining the potency of materials such as mistletoe, holy berries, and similar stuffs which must be gathered periodically. It is likewise ineffective in preserving the deceased for later resurrection. It is otherwise effectual. The sort of material which can be treated by a preserve spell depends upon the level of the caster. Hard, relatively dry material, 2nd to 4th level. Soft, relatively wet material, 5th to 7th level. Semi-liquid and liquid materials, 8th level and up. A container is necessary only in cases where a relatively high degree of moisture is concerned. The material component of the spell are a pinch of dust, a bit of resin or amber, and a drop of brandy. This is potentially a very useful spell. A lot of material components will have a very limited shelf life, and being able to preserve them is rather useful. I'm not sure why there's a restriction on mistletoe and holy berries. I assume it is to oblige a druid to regularly gather said materials, but this does cause some pretty serious problems for a druid who is going for an extended adventure in the Underdark or in another environment like a desert or mountains where mistletoe and holly isn't available. Maybe allowing this at a high enough level would be an option, or perhaps reducing the effectiveness of spells cast with mistletoe or holly berries that have been preserved with the spell is the other option, to maybe give a bit more range to druids that way. The other thing to remember as a player is that this is the perfect spell to cast as much as you can during downtime. I'm also surprised that food items aren't mentioned. You can pack quite a bit of food in half a cubic foot. That could be another option, is to help preserve fresh fruits during an expedition where such items cannot be gathered and would be difficult to preserve. Again, a hot desert is a good example of that. Next, we have protection from cantrips, which has a range of touch, a duration of 1 day per level, and it will affect one creature or object. By casting this spell, the magic user provides immunity to the effects of cantrips cast by other magic users, apprentices, or creatures that use cantrip magic. The spell will protect the caster or one item or person that he or she touches, such as a spellbook or a drawer containing spell components. Any cantrip that is cast against the person or item in question dissipates with an audible popping sound. This spell is often used by a magic user with mischievous apprentices, or one who wishes apprentices to clean or shine an area using elbow grease instead of magic. Any unwilling target of this spell must be touched via a roll to hit, and is allowed a saving throw versus spell to escape the effect. Expanding on the cantrips that we've covered before, I would have been disappointed if something like that hadn't shown up at some point, because clearly apprentices will get in trouble and magic users may want to prevent that without using the more powerful anti-magic spells such as Dispel Magic, etc. against just some cantrips, which are, relatively speaking, quite minor in their effects. Some DMs may decide that magical effects used by creatures that are in the same scope as regular cantrips, even though the creatures are not described as using cantrips themselves. Next is Tasha's Uncontrollable Hideous Laughter. It has a range of 5 inches, a duration of 1 round, and will affect one creature. This spell enables the caster to cause the subject to perceive everything as hilariously funny. The effect is not immediate, and the subject creature will feel only a slight tingling on the round the Dweemer is placed, but on the round immediately following, it will begin smiling, then giggling, chuckling, tittering, snickering, guffawing, and finally collapsing into gales of uncontrollable hideous laughter. Although this magic mirth lasts only a single round, the affected creature must spend the next round regaining its feet, and it will be at -2 from its strength, or -2 to hit and damage, on the 3rd and 4th round following the spell casting. A successful save versus spell negates the effect. The saving throw depends on the intelligence of the creature. Creatures with an intelligence of 3 or less are totally unaffected. Those with an intelligence of 4 to 8 save at -6. Those with intelligence 9 to 12 save at -4, those with intelligence of 13 to 15 save at -2, and those with intelligence of 16 or greater have normal saving throw probability. The material component of the spell are a small feather, a tiny wooden paddle, and a minute tort. The tort is hurled at the subject while the feather is waved in one hand and the paddle is tapped against the posterior of the spellcaster. So, Tasha finally makes an appearance. This is a fun spell. I would only add that while the creature is collapsing into the uncontrollable laughter for that round that follows the casting, that it certainly should lose any dexterity bonus, perhaps get a -2 or -4 penalty on its armor class even. The other thing is if you have a jester type character, perhaps that can affect the saving throw if the jester has been using his, I will say, powers of derision upon the recipient of the spell. What's interesting about this spell is that while the combat uses are quite obvious, having somebody just start laughing uncontrollably in the middle of a social situation may cause problem for the victim of the spell, or cause the kind of distraction that the players would need. There's a lot of possibilities with this spell. Next is Vocalize. It has a range of touch, a duration of 5 rounds, and will affect one spell-casting creature. The casting time is 1 round. This spell allows the recipient to cast spells that normally require a verbal component without having to make a sound, so long as the casting of the subsequent spells takes place entirely within the duration of the Vocalize spell. This spell is of great use in situations where quiet is desired, or when the recipient is under the influence of a silence spell. The Vocalize spell does not negate possible effects upon other vocal communication. A message spell could be cast from within an area of magical silence, but no information would be transmitted back to the caster. The spell does not negate the effects of silence, but merely offsets it for the purposes of subsequent spell casting. If a spell cast by means of a vocalized spell has some audible effect, that sound will be masked for as long as the silence remains in force. The material component of this spell is a bell without a clapper or else a jailbird's tongue. So now we have a spell that enhances other spells. Most combat-oriented spells take less than a round to cast, so presumably casting this spell could allow the magic user to cast 5 more spells while under the effects of a silence spell or while silence is desired. I quite like this spell. It has a lot of potential in the hands of a smart player. It is to be pointed out, though, that while it will make the casting of spells more discreet, the somatic and material components are still needed, so people could still see that somebody is casting spells. They just wouldn't hear them. Next is Whip, which has a duration of 1 round per level and a casting time of 2 segments. By means of this spell, the magic user creates a material, whip-like substance up to 1 inch distance from his or her person. The spellcaster can wield this whip by moving his or her hand as if it held an actual one, for the magical one will respond to movements made by its evoker. The lash can be used so as to make both a whistling crack and an actual strike each turn. The sound alone is sufficient to keep normal animals at bay unless they save versus spell. Any animal actually struck, as indicated by a normal to hit die roll, must save versus spell at -1 to -4, or else slink away and not return for at least an hour. Note that the whip does not do actual damage to the creature struck. Creatures with intelligence above 3 are not affected, nor are giant-sized animals above bear size, nor are monsters. The whip can also be used in melee combat, a successful to-hit roll indicating that the lash has struck and wrapped around an opponent's weapon. If that weapon is an edged one, the whip must make a saving throw versus crushing blow, 13 or better. If the weapon is non-edged, the whip must save versus normal blow, 6 or better. Success on this saving throw indicates that the whip has torn the weapon from the opponent's hand, unless the opponent succeeds on a saving throw versus spell. An affected weapon will be cast to the ground, and the opponent must take 1 round to recover it. The magic bonus of a target weapon applies as a penalty to the whip's saving throw versus crushing blow or normal blow, and the magic resistance of an intended target opponent must fail for a 2-hit roll to be possible in the first place. The material component of the spell is a small bit of silk braided so as to form a miniature whip. I'm not in love with this spell. I mean, I think its power against animals could be quite important, but this whole section on it being used in melee combat with armed opponents is fairly uninteresting. First, you have to roll a hit. Then the weapon gets to make a fairly easy save if it's edged. in order to not be affected again. Then you need a saving throw versus spell. I mean, you need 3 rolls to succeed. This really nerfs that spell a lot. I also don't like the fact that the save versus spell at -1 to -4, there's no indication of what causes this variability in the adjustment to the save. Is it their intelligence? Is it their size? Is it random? We have no explanation. I would probably never have my character memorize it, even if I had access to it, unless it was the only available spell. This is followed by Zephyr, which has a duration of 1 segment, a casting time of 2, and the area of effect is a 1-inch path, a half an inch per level in length. By means of this spell, a gentle draft of air moves from the spellcaster and travels in the direction that he or she is facing. It continues until the maximum area of effect is reached. The force of the Zephyr is sufficient to cause small flames to waver and dance. It fans flames and fires of larger size, making them hotter, +1 on damage dice if applicable. It will hold back moving clouds of vapors, such as a cloud kill, for 1 round. It will weaken such vapors as fog cloud and wall of fog so as to reduce their duration by half. It will move stagnant air, vapors, or even poisonous gases backwards by 1 inch. And this force likewise reduces their duration and potency by half, unless the vapor or gas is renewed by some source. The material component for this spell is a piece of fine parchment, accordion folded, and tacked near the bottom with a pin, or ivory or silver. A weaker version of the Gust of Wind, but one that could be quite useful if the latter is not available. It can also be used by a creative player in some interesting ways, getting small flames to waver and dance, and people to feel a breeze where there should be none could be one way to fake a haunting, for example, or to cause a distraction of some sort because of that. A spell with good potential. Quickly going over the spells, I quite like Bind. Deep Pockets is a good utility spell. Flaming Sphere, a fairly decent attack and defense spell, but also quite destructive, so could be used to overcome some obstacles. Irritation, I feel one version of it relatively nerfed for a 2nd level spell, but the other one has a lot of possibility in certain specific circumstances. No alignment, always useful to have in the kind of game where alignment is important. Melf's Acid Arrow, again a useful spell. I would adjust it a bit in order to allow for an arrow missing its target because of the armor to affect the armor but not the target himself. Preserve can be very useful, and I would personally tend to rule that you can preserve food with it. Protection from cantrips, sort of a corollary of having cantrips, is a magic user wanting to have this. In fact, I could see how a magic user without this spell could be very draconian towards his or her apprentices in order to prevent having to suffer their casting of cantrips on his or her person. Tasha's Uncontrollable Hideous Laughter. It's a spell I liked, and we see Tasha showing up, as far as I know, for the first time. Vocalize, very useful spell. It's the start of spells that affect other spells. Then we have Whip, which, as I've said, is fairly uninteresting to me, and Zephyr, which is a good option for those magic users who don't have access to the Gust of Wind. So this has been the Grumpy Old Slan, looking at 2nd level magic user spells in Unearthed Arcana, and I'll see you next time.